All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This meeting will come to order. This is the regular meeting of the Land Use and Transportation Committee. My name is Supervisor Malia Cohen. I'm the chair of this committee. And to my right is Supervisor Scott Weiner, who is the vice chair. And to my left is our new member, Supervisor Aaron Peskin, who will be a regular member of this committee now. Our clerk is the ever so lovely and talented Miss Elisa Samara. And I'd like to take a moment and thank SFGov TV staff, Jesse Larson, as well as Jim Smith, for broadcasting this meeting. Madam Clerk, do we have any announcements today?
Yes. Please make sure to silence all cell phones and electronic devices. Completed speaker cards and copies of any documents to be included as part of the file should be submitted to the clerk. Items acted upon today will appear on the February 2nd Board of Supervisors agenda unless otherwise stated.
All right, thank you so much. Could you call item 1?
Yes. Item number 1 is an ordinance amending the building code to provide that a building in probate shall not be considered vacant or abandoned for purposes of the annual registration requirement if it does not contribute to blight.
Okay, Supervisor Tang is the author of this item. Today we have Ray Law from Supervisor Tang's office to present on this item. Mr. Law, the floor is yours. Thank you and welcome.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. My name is Ray Law, Legislative Aide to Supervisor Katie Tang. Thanks for having me here today. This item before you today is to amend the vacant abandoned building requirements in the San Francisco Building Code to exclude properties in probate from being considered vacant or abandoned. Just for background, DBI has an existing program dealing with vacant abandoned buildings with some major requirements, including putting the properties into a registry, paying an annual fee, putting a sign in the window if it is a commercial space with leasing information. The goal of our legislation is to exempt from this program requirement for those properties that are undergoing probate process, given the difficult situations that people must go through already. This would also be limited to properties that are in the probate process for no more than 2 years. We believe this is a very simple change that will significantly help those people who are already undergoing a difficult time. Thank you, and I will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Colleagues, are there any questions on this from Mr. Law or anything?
Madam Chair,
sure.
To Mr. Law, why for a period not to exceed 2 years? If it's a good public policy change, why not have it exist forever?
Just because we want to exclude for those properties that are undergoing very complicated case for more than 2 years. Because typically, the probate process will go from 6 months to 12 months.
Understood.
Okay. All right. Seeing no other questions from my colleagues, let's go ahead and take public comment on this item. Please come. Everyone will have 2 minutes to speak at the item at this podium. We hear a soft 30-minute chime indicating that you have 30 seconds left. All right. Seeing no public comment on item 1 is closed. Mr. Law.
I have some staff from DBI. They are going to give an update about this program.
Fantastic. Let's take the staff.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Bill Strawn with the Department of Building Inspection. I'm here with Inspector Michael Grinnell, who manages our day-to-day work with this vacant building program. We did pass out some slides. We'll be happy to run through those very briefly. If you have any questions, please feel free to raise them with us.
Thank you. Welcome. The floor is yours.
So, Michael, why don't you just walk through these?
Okay, I can't see it at all.
Oh, come over here.
Hi, my name is Michael Gunnell, work with the Department of Building Inspection Code Enforcement Division, and I currently manage this particular project. So I guess, I don't know if everybody has been through this or not. Have you, how are you moving this over? There we go, sorry about that. Okay, basically the vacant and abandoned building ordinance, as we're all aware of, is you're required to register whether you are vacant building or a partially vacant building under our program, of which has an annual registration fee. There are certain requirements to be registered at a certain amount of time, maintenance requirements, security requirements, and information from the owner to be posted on the building. We have some brief definitions of which are in the building code, so if anybody wants to take a look at that, we obviously can go to this at any time. Hopefully there's some questions I can answer along the way here. It's a brief map of basically outlining where most of the residential and some of the commercial properties are throughout the city. As you can see, it's fairly well spread out. The southern part of the city, eastern part, are large concentrations of vacant buildings. This is a small breakdown of basically by the districts, supervisor districts, kind of where we are, and bar chart there for you. And this is specifically related to our recent commercial vacant program, and these are the ones that we're currently working on right now. Small quarterly list totaling various aspects of what we do: buildings occupied, director's hearing, orders of abatements, 9-time penalties, that sort of thing. We also have a small outline of the process of basically from complaint all the way to abatement, or possibly even referral to city attorneys. And there we go.
All right, thank you so much. Bill?
Thanks very much.
My pleasure. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and reopen public comment to see if there's anyone that wanted to comment on DBI's presentation. Public comment is now open. No public comment. Public comment is closed at this time. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Appreciate your presentation. Colleagues, if there are no further discussion, let's move this forward without objection. All right, without objection, this motion passes. Forward. Could you please call item number 2, Madam Clerk?
Madam Chair, I believe
Yes.
there were some amendments.
Oh.
That were handed in by...
Mr. Law, do you want to talk about the amendments? Amendments offered by Supervisor Tang?
Yeah, it's actually the same item we just discussed. I would like to submit an amendment for this item regarding the vacant abandoned building requirements in the San Francisco Building Code.
Madam Chair, I would move those amendments.
Thank you.
you need to make a motion to rescind the previous.
Motion made by Supervisor Peskin, seconded by myself.
Motion made to rescind the previous vote, and motion made to incorporate the amendments that Mr. Law just spoke to that are before us.
Did you get those motions?
Yes, I did.
Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's take this vote again. We have a piece of legislation, and let's take it as amended. Without objection, that motion passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, let's move on, ladies and gentlemen, to item number 2. Please, Ms. Clerk.
Item number 2 is an ordinance amending the administrative code to provide notice to tenants facing eviction regarding eligibility for city affordable housing programs.
Okay, Supervisor Tang is also the author of this item. Today we have Deanna Kizon from the Supervisor's Office to present on this item. Ms. Kizon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Deanna Kizon, we are tag teaming today. So I'm here to talk about our tenant notification legislation. We, in discussions throughout the city, we are working so hard to add affordable housing stock to our portfolio in San Francisco. We find that it is very important that we also educate residents about these programs. And instead of reinventing the wheel, we would like to add to the Rent Board's Form 1007, which was required under legislation by Supervisor Kim to notify tenants that are going through the eviction process, and adding a requirement that we notify them of the affordable housing programs available through the city. So adding an additional sentence or line to the current notification. I've provided copies of what tenants are currently given. Gratefully, they are required to be in 6 different languages, so this would also ensure that a lot of our population is notified about these programs. We are also adding some simple cleanup language to legislation that was passed by the board recently. Under state law, properties with contracts or recorded agreements with governmental agencies, there's a 3-year limit as opposed to the 5-year limit that was passed by the board. So the city attorney asked that we include that cleanup legislation in our current proposal.
Thank you. Are there any amendments or anything that we've
No
consider?
amendments,
No
yes.
amendments. All right. Thank you. Is that it?
That is it.
All right. Thank you for your presentation. Let's go ahead and take public comment on item 2. Public comment is open, ladies and gentlemen. Please line up if you're interested in public comment right here at this middle podium. Sir, are you for item 2? Yes. 3. Okay. Thank you. Public comment is closed. Thank you. Okay. Colleagues, is there anything that you'd like to add, question to item 2? Seeing none, okay. Let's move this forward with a positive recommendation. Without objection, this motion passes. Thank you. Could you call item 3?
Item number 3 is an ordinance amending the planning code to permit affordable housing as a principal use and not requiring a conditional use permit.
All right. Supervisor Wiener is the author of this item. Supervisor Wiener, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you for calendaring this important item today. And I want to thank our planning staff for working with us, specifically Menika Mohan. And I also want to thank our nonprofit affordable housing partners, the ones who build affordable housing, who have worked with us on this legislation or supporting it. Mercy Housing, Bridge Housing, Larkin Street Youth Services, and the Booker T. Washington Community Service Center. Colleagues, this legislation will make it easier and faster and less expensive to build affordable housing in San Francisco. As you know, and we have a lot of, there are various policy disputes in this building, but one thing we all agree on is that we are in the midst of a severe housing affordability crisis. The voters, time and again, have told us overwhelmingly that they want more affordable housing, and they want it yesterday. The Housing Trust Fund, several years ago, Prop C, passed overwhelmingly to create a new fund for affordable housing. Last November, the Affordable Housing Bond, Proposition A, passed overwhelmingly. The first affordable housing bond to pass in many, many years. Mayor Lee and our board president, London Breed, announced late last month that they are reconvening the Housing Working Group to take a closer look at inclusionary housing requirements for market rate projects. And the bureaucratic processes that delay the production of housing across all income levels will also be discussed, with the goal of putting a measure on the November ballot. Legislation before us today, colleagues, responds to our affordability crisis and to a voter mandate to increase affordability, and it does so by expediting the approval of 100% affordable housing projects where 100% of the units are affordable to low or moderate income households. This legislation does not apply beyond those 100% affordable housing projects. Specifically, the legislation for these specific projects removes any requirement for conditional use. This reduces approval uncertainty for these projects. It also reduces the time required to approve these projects, which at a minimum, it will reduce the approval time for these projects from 3 to 6 months, and for a number of projects by 9 months, a year, or longer. We know that the standard for conditional use is necessary and desirable. Is a project necessary and desirable for a neighborhood? We tend to apply the conditional use requirement for projects where we aren't sure if the project is necessary and desirable, where it may be a good thing, it may be a bad thing. So, for example, we utilize conditional use for formula retail, because chain stores, we are skeptical of them, and they may be good in some situations, and they may not be good in other situations. We require conditional use in some neighborhoods if you're going to increase the number of bars in a neighborhood, because that might be a good thing, it might be a bad thing. And so we want an in-depth analysis by planning department and then a public hearing at the Planning Commission to get community input and to make a determination, is it necessary and desirable. Colleagues, there is no question about whether affordable housing is necessary and desirable. It is by definition extremely necessary and extremely desirable, and we need dramatically more affordable housing, and we need it not tomorrow, not a year from now, not 10 years from now. We need it now, and we need it as soon as possible. And anything we can do to make it easier and faster to get affordable housing built in San Francisco, the better. I do want to also stress that this legislation, contrary to the claims that some have made, does not in any way remove the public from the process of approving these projects. This does not short-circuit public participation. Public participation is incredibly important for all development in San Francisco, market rate or affordable housing. Under this legislation, there will still be intense design review by the planning department. We want to make sure that all development, whatever it is in San Francisco, is well designed for our neighborhoods. The legislation does not in any way reduce neighborhood notification. Neighbors will continue to receive notification about projects so that they can participate in the process, so that they can express opinions, whether it's about the design or anything else. And the legislation does not in any way reduce the right of any member of the public to seek discretionary review from the Planning Commission if they oppose a project. So if the project has opposition, people can still file discretionary review and obtain and have a hearing at the Planning Commission. What this will do is say that for the projects that do not have opposition, and those do exist, you do not have to go to the Planning Commission. Right now, even if an affordable housing project has complete consensus, has no opposition in a neighborhood, it still has to go through this lengthy process and go to the Commission for a full hearing, adding time and money to the project. And this legislation will move us away from that. So colleagues, this legislation is overdue. It is important, and we should support it today. I do want to just note, and we initially introduced this last fall, and in January, earlier this month, based on some feedback from the planning department, we introduced substitute legislation it was non-substantive, but to reorganize some of the provisions. For some reason, the substitute legislation was not what got attached to the agenda. It was the previous version. Again, substantively the same, but reorganized. The amendments that were in the substitute legislation that we introduced this month do a few things. They add a consistency finding with the general plans. There are some general amendments to adopt recommendations contained in the Planning Department staff report regarding just the organization of the legislation, not the substance. In addition, the substitute legislation specifically maintains the requirement for a conditional use if the site proposed for the affordable housing is either a grocery store or a movie theater, or if the project triggers a CU, a conditional use for parking. These were issues that the Planning Commission had raised in Planning Department, and so we incorporated those in the substitute legislation. And to clarify, the Planning Director's authority to issue administrative exceptions that were previously granted through a CU process. So colleagues, those are, I've distributed amendments today that are simply the substitute legislation that we publicly introduced a few weeks ago. The city attorney confirms that these are not substantive and will not require a continuance. So colleagues, after public comment, I will move these amendments. And now, Madam Chair, if I may, I would like to ask first Menika Mohan from the Planning Department, followed by Sophie Hayward from the Mayor's Office of Housing.
Thank you, Supervisor Wiener. Good afternoon, Chair Cohen, Supervisor Peskin, and Supervisor Wiener. My name is Menika Mohan, planning staff, and I'm here today to discuss the Planning Commission recommendation for ordinance number 150914. The Planning Commission heard this item on December 3rd of 2015. The legislation proposes an administrative review process for 100% affordable projects that would need a conditional use authorization, a permit review in downtown, or a large project authorization in eastern neighborhoods. At the hearing, the Planning Commission entertained two motions, which both failed to pass. A motion to continue the proposed ordinance to January 21st, 2016 failed on a 3-3 vote. A second motion to adopt a recommendation for approval as amended by staff, including removal of grocery stores and theaters from the legislation and consideration to ground floor commercial uses, also failed on a 3-3 vote. Per Planning Code Section 302C, given that the Commission was unable to pass a motion, the ordinance was forwarded to the Board of Supervisors with a recommendation for disapproval. The ordinance has since been amended and substituted by Supervisor Wiener on January 12, 2016, and included staff recommendations to create a new section in the Planning Code dedicated to the authorization of affordable housing projects, where affordable housing is defined as housing comprised solely of housing that is restricted for a minimum of 55 years as affordable for persons and families of low and moderate income, as defined by the state of California. Staff is available for questions. Thank you.
Sophie.
Thank you, Ms. Hayward.
Good afternoon, Chair Cohen and Supervisor Wiener and Supervisor Peskin. Sophie Hayward from the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development. I'm just here today to note that we are, of course, supportive of this legislation. Anything that we can do to bring affordable housing units online faster, we are supportive of. I also want to note that this moves the needle, but it doesn't overturn the apple cart. That is to say, there have only been 6 projects since 2010 that have required only a conditional use authorization. So this legislation would remove the hearing requirement for those projects. In addition, I want to note that the Commission's calendar and its backlog is real. Simply trying to schedule something, even if it's not contested in any way, generally is taking right now 2 to 3 months to get on the Commission calendar. And so that's 2 to 3 or more months that we save just on the administrative side of these efforts. So thank you very much. I'm available for any questions.
I don't think we have any questions at this time. Thank you.
Madam Chair, at this point, if we perhaps open public comment?
I would agree with that. I have some public speaking cards in front of me. I will call them. Please come up when you hear your name. Eileen Boken, Pat Scott, Rob Poole, Mike Edge, Donald, okay, we're going to have to work on your penmanship, Donald. And Christy Wang.
Okay. Eileen Boken. I will be using the overhead. Okay. Opposing the legislation, rather than looking at other options, such as improving the planning department's efficiency or hiring new staff, this legislation seeks to improve the processing time for 100% affordable housing projects by cutting corners. This sends the wrong message. It would result in more planning decisions being made internally behind closed doors. This sends the wrong message. The department has not made a compelling argument for the need for this legislation, only that stating that it would improve the process, and I quote, at a slightly faster rate, unquote, and save projects as much as 3 to 6 months in review time. The maximum improvement per the planning department would be 3 to 6 months, which means it could be also less. When it was heard at the Planning Commission, Commissioner Richards urged the director to look at departmental efficiencies rather than looking at eliminating CUs as the preferred option. The director refused to even consider this option. Commissioner Richards also reminded the director that the budget process was coming up and that hiring new staff to reduce processing time was an option. The director also refused to even consider this. This inflexibility by the Director of Planning creates a negative perception, and sometimes perceptions can outweigh other factors. It creates the perception that the department is seeking to eliminate not only CU, but the participation both of the Planning Commission and members of the public. I would suggest a fast-track process at the Planning Commission for a hearing date. If that is the issue, put it on the fast track for hearing at the Commission. Also, the legislation could set a precedent and eliminate CU for other types of projects.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. Pat Scott, followed by Rob Poole, followed by Mike Edge, followed by Donald and Christy Wong.
Supervisors. Pat Scott from Booker T. I know you've heard my tales of woe about the project at Booker T, which started almost 10 years ago. 10 years ago when I was 25 years younger. Anything that will move this process is something that I urge you to support. Trying to build 50 units of affordable housing has been a nightmare in this town. When my neighbors first heard that we were planning on developing the site on Presidio and Sutter, they came to my office and said, "We're getting rid of those people down the street," talking about the people at Westside projects. "And you're not bringing any more of them into this community." So they did everything they could to stop this, talking about the size, the height, the density, anything that would obfuscate the fact that they really did not want these young people in their neighborhood. We're building 50 units of housing, all of it affordable, half of it for young people that have aged out of foster care, and the nightmare process to take 10 years to do a project like this. It took some time off of my life, but more importantly, it sends a signal that we don't support people that can't afford the high prices of housing in San Francisco today. So we need to do whatever we can to fix this thing. What happened to us is that a project that was originally $26 million is now $38 million. It was that long period of time that increased the costs, and I urge you to support this legislation.
Thank you. Mr. Poole?
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Rob Poole with the San Francisco Housing Action Coalition, speaking on behalf of the organization's 300 business organization individual members. We very much support this legislation. San Franciscans have made it clear that housing is a priority for the city, and housing that is permanently affordable to low and moderate income residents is the #1 priority. And right now, it's never been harder to build it. We did well by passing the bond this past November, but it's not enough. We need to do everything we can to get affordable units online faster. And as we've heard from several affordable housing developers, particularly Bridge and Mercy Housing, the conditional use process can add at least 3 to 6 months to your project's timeline. And projects have financing deadlines. And with the longer timeline, it means it's hard to meet those deadlines, which means it's hard to get these units off the ground, which means that low-income workers, middle-income workers, these are service workers, first responders, teachers, have a hard time finding new quality housing in San Francisco. Now, we've heard from some folks that this will take away community process, and we absolutely disagree. All the community meetings that developers and neighborhood groups host will still happen. There will still be plenty of opportunities for residents in San Francisco to engage in the process, to participate in the project's design, and provide input. If for some reason that someone will want to oppose an affordable housing project in San Francisco, well, first we have bigger problems. But they can request discretionary review, they can appeal it to the full board, and they can delay it longer. But I don't think anyone wants to do that. I think we want to see new affordable housing projects on the ground, and we want it now. We urge you to support this legislation today, get it done legislatively, and move it to the full board. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike Edge?
Hi, I'm Mike Egge. I'm a 25-year resident of North Beach. And while serving on the civil grand jury a couple years ago, I co-authored a report on the state of our affordable housing programs. One of the things that I found out is that we've been having a long-term problem with the erosion of affordable by both policy and by market conditions, housing stock. It's a long-term problem that's existed long since before the World Wide Web. And our policy response to it has been one of consolidation, and it hasn't worked. Neither political nor material consolidation has worked. If you've ever read the book Watership Down by Richard Adams, I don't like referring to it this way, but I often refer to our housing policy up until now as the Cowslips-Warren approach. But if you've read Watership Down, you know that all the rabbits in Cowslips-Warren eventually died, including those who felt that they could hold on to what they already had at the expense of others. We have to stop consolidating, and we have to start restoring affordable housing stock. I supported this legislation at planning, and I support it here. It's a small, very important step on the way to restoring affordability in the city, and I urge you, all of you, to support it. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Egge. Donald, followed by Christy Wang, followed by Laura Clark, John Deshotsky, Sonia Traus, and Pat Valentino.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Supervisors. Donald Dusnip here, a resident of the city of San Francisco, who's very concerned about the housing crisis. Over the last 40 years, you hear a promise to build a whole new solution to our housing crisis by progressives and NIMBYs year after year. But that's not what you'll get. Instead, you'll get gridlock and Room 250. History has proven to San Franciscans that NIMBY promises equal endless wait for housing solutions that will never come. The people I've met can't wait. The senior HIV-disabled man living in the Castro with 3 roommates has to choose between paying for diabetes medication or paying his rent. He can't wait. The single African-American mom living in a garage in the Bayview with 2 children who desperately needs a raise can't wait. The Latino student from the Mission living with his grandparents while attending San Francisco State with a mountain of debt can't wait. You can't wait, and neither can our progressive city. We need to roll up our sleeves and start making progress right now. More gridlock in City Hall won't help anyone except maybe the progressives and the NIMBYs, who are looking for any opportunity to take our city backwards. We just can't take that risk. We have to defend the progress we've already made building affordable housing in our city. We need to go even further with today's legislation. Affordable housing as principal use by housing champion Supervisor Scott Wiener. We are in a public emergency and we can no longer wait. Supervisors, please cut out the gridlock at City Hall and vote yes, affordable housing as principal use today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Christy Wang?
Thank you, Supervisors. Christy Wong from SPUR, Community Planning Policy Director. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on this legislation. With the housing crisis today, San Francisco must do all that it can to support the faster production of more housing, particularly housing that is restricted to lower and middle incomes. SPUR believes that on top of increased funding, improving the approvals process is one key part of the effort to creating more affordable housing and making it available more quickly and at a lower cost. As a former affordable housing developer myself, I know that this legislation will make an enormous difference in reducing the time and energy required to get through city-required processes. With all of the things that affordable housing developers have to get through, this is something that's actually within the control of the city. SPUR urges you to recommend the approval of this legislation with planning's recommended modifications. The legislation is drafted to clearly only benefit affordable housing projects that are 100% restricted to households under 120% of area median income, projects that are built by the city's nonprofit partners and funded by public dollars. This can make a huge difference to the timelines of affordable housing projects, especially given the inflexible calendars of state and federal funding sources that are not always coordinated, and it does not prevent these projects from engaging in a robust community process on their own timeline. Thank you again, and I hope you will support this.
Thank you. Laura Clark, followed by John Deshotsky, followed by Sonia Strauss, and then Pat Valentino.
Hi, Laura Clark, Grow SF. I don't even know why I'm going to spend a lot of time up here. I think all the arguments have been made.
Affordable housing is always and forever necessary and desirable. It's obvious. This is low-hanging fruit. This is the kind of legislation that we need to rush through this process. It's intelligent, and all of the people who are going to be living in these affordable housing projects are people who struggle to come out and tell you how much they need it. It's 2 o'clock, 2:15 on a Monday. That means that all of the working people who are going to be living in these homes can't come out here and beg you to expedite this legislation. So please pass this. Thanks. All right. Thank you so much. Next speaker, John Dushatsky.
Hello, my name is John Dushatsky. I'm a San Francisco resident, property owner for over a decade, and working on a new affordable housing project. I support this legislation for several reasons. One, we are in need of more affordable housing, period. Two, the nonprofit teams that are working on this problem deserve an easier way to bring new affordable housing to the market. And three, there are already many approvals required for these projects to obtain entitlements. This legislation removes some of the redundant layers. I urge you to support it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sonia Traus.
Hi, I'm Sonia Traus. I'm here to testify in favor of this legislation. I think it's clever and practical and an effective way to make building affordable housing faster, cheaper, and less risky. But the best thing about this legislation is the message it sends. It sends the message that affordable housing is a priority. It announces that it's the policy of San Francisco that affordable housing is everywhere necessary and desirable. I was shocked when I watched the Planning Commission hearing to see people testifying against this legislation. Testifying against this legislation is testifying in favor of the ability of San Franciscans to block affordable housing projects. And I do think that it's appropriate at this time to announce to San Franciscans that while we may hear that you think a 5-story building is ugly, San Francisco has decided that we're not interested in that. That what we're more interested in is seeing the new affordable housing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Pat Valentino, followed by Brian Hanlon, John Schwark, John Stewart, Robert Stevenson, and then Ian McLean.
Good afternoon. My name is Patrick Valentino. While I'm the president of the Board of Community Housing Partnership, I'm here as an individual, very concerned that, and I would like to support that this legislation go through. Part of my day job is working on affordable housing, and one of the things I've learned over the past couple of years working on that is that the financing stack is incredibly difficult. It's incredibly difficult to get affordable housing projects done. You've got to bring together tax credit investors, agency loans, and private money all together at the same time to create a project that is incredibly beneficial to the community. We have a lot of debates about whether to get to 25% inclusionary when we're talking about private market developer contributions. We've seen 40% as a threshold in a few of the projects lately. This is our chance to push the 100% up to the front of the line. We all know the value and importance of producing more affordable units. Every neighborhood needs to participate in affordable housing production. We need to see it throughout the city, and San Francisco is not made up of gated communities. We're all in this together, so I think it's very important that we all support this legislation. Let's get it done, and let's move on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Brian Hanlon.
Hi, my name is Brian Hanlon. I'm with the California Renters Legal Advocacy and Education Fund, and I support this legislation. I understand that below market rate housing developers often need to cobble together financing from disparate sources, which often include tight deadlines. Removing any process roadblocks, including those that only shave 2 months from approval time, is often of vital importance to BMR housing developers. Moreover, I understand that some people purporting to represent the interest of local residents do not support this legislation. This is unsurprising, as the representative from Booker T. Washington Community Service Center noted earlier. The history of BMR housing in the United States is the history of incumbent residents fighting to exclude people based on race or class. Do not be cowed by the forces of exclusion. Pass this legislation now. Thank you.
Thank you. John Schwartz.
Hi, my name is John Schwark. I'm a South of Market resident. I just wanted to
focus on one real specific thing to keep it short, which is that having gone to a lot of the planning department meetings, that really is a bottleneck. You know, a lot of meetings, and I think this will really help with that. A lot of times they'll actually have meetings that have to, or have projects that have to come back to the planning department again, and they get scheduled sometimes 2 and 3 months out because the planning director or the planning commissioners will be talking to each other about when they can fit it back on the agenda. So, you know, as an extra bonus, in addition to the projects that this directly affects, it will be helping us to shuffle a lot of other things in quicker. Thank you.
Thank you. John Stewart.
Good afternoon. Thanks for your attention. I'm John Stewart of the John Stewart Company and a resident of San Francisco, and I'm here to support the proposed legislation by Supervisor Wiener. We are a nonprofit firm, but we work with our colleagues in the we're a for-profit company, let me get that straight. We work with our colleagues in the nonprofit community. I'm in trouble now, with Mercy and Bridge Housing. We've got about 33,000 units under management in the state. Mostly in Northern California, we have about 2,000 units in the pipeline. That includes our major projects here in the city have been North Beach Place and Hunters View, which is 700 units. Booker T. Washington, and we are also in work on 2 RAD projects. Addressing the question that Supervisor Wiener brought up, and that is public input, we found that we have an overwhelming amount of that perforce. We have had on Hunters View alone over 100 meetings, a third of which have been night. On Hunters View and North Beach Place, our pre-development cycle was 4 and 5 years. Actually, North Beach Place, we went through 4 mayors to get that deal done. Who are the people that look at this thing? Not just the neighbors, but you're looking at lenders, Mo, TCAC, SIDLAC, and every one of them has a series of criteria that are well above and beyond bulk and height. So we are vetted to a fairly well, and I would urge you not to enhance egg production by choking the chicken. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Stevenson, Robert Stevenson is next, followed by Ian McLean, followed by Donnell Fuller, then followed by Kendra Douglas, Dwayne Sears, Mark Anthony, and Lenora.
Great. Good afternoon. My name is Robert Stevenson. I'm a San Francisco resident and have been developing affordable housing for the last 15 years. I wanted to speak to I support the legislation. I wanted to speak to the notion that this would result in a reduction of community input opportunities and community outreach. It's really fundamental to understand that San Francisco's nonprofits, who are the groups that develop affordable housing here, are a core value is community outreach. And in fact, we can't even get to the starting line unless we're selected in the first place by the city in various fashions on the basis of our track record of community outreach. So it's absolutely fundamental, and it's the way that the groups who do this work get selected in the first place. So if we trip up and don't reach out to the community on a project, we don't get another chance. So this is just fundamental to the way affordable housing gets developed here. So the idea that this legislation would reduce that is simply not possible. The system is set up to not allow for that. So my most recent work was on Renee Casanova Apartments, for example, which is on Folsom at Essex, 120 units. We started community outreach before any plans were drawn. We continued through the planning process. We continued through approvals, through financing and design development, through construction. We were providing weekly updates to the community. We formed an individual project committee of neighbors, and my last community meeting was after the building was built, before people moved in. We had a community meeting to make sure everyone's comfortable with how the lease-up was going to work. So it's just not going to result in reduced public input. Thank you.
Thank you. Ian McLean, then Donnell Fuller, and Kendra Douglas.
When this legislation was presented on December 3rd to the Planning Commission, it hit a brick wall. It's pretty unusual for legislation of this significance. And often a supervisor will go back and fix it and bring it back to the Commission. That's not happening here. This is moving forward, even with a disapproval from the Planning Commission. Now, one of the commissioners said at that hearing, if Prop A had included this legislation as a part of Prop A, they had voted for Prop A, but if it included this, they would have voted against it. Prop A, Prop K, and all the other housing propositions never included anything about this sort of workaround in terms of allowing residents to have input to the process. And so the key thing here is, let's work for affordable housing, but let's make sure that residents and neighbors have an opportunity to ensure that neighborhood character is not destroyed in the process. Neighborhood character and protecting and preserving it is one of the priority policies of the city. It's being ignored in this process. Thank you.
Thank you. Donnell Fuller? How about Kendra Douglas? How about Dwayne Sears? How about Mark Anthony? How about Lenora? All right. If anyone else, I don't see them, so why don't you go ahead and speak?
Hi, I'm Brandy Gordon. I'm with Bridge Housing. I have sort of a prepared statement from Bridge Housing as well as some other information I wanted to share. So Bridge Housing Corporation is a 32-year-old nonprofit developer, owner.
Please speak into the mic a little bit so we can just hear you a
Sorry.
little better. Thank you.
32-year-old nonprofit developer and owner of affordable housing, born and headquartered here in San Francisco, and as a longstanding member of the housing community on the front lines of our city's struggles to increase housing opportunities, we strongly support legislation introduced by Supervisor Wiener to amend the San Francisco Planning Code so housing projects that are 100% affordable would forego the Planning Commission for conditional use authorization. Under this proposal, 100% affordable housing projects would be approved by administrative staff, saving time and uncertainty related to the sometimes lengthy commission hearing process. And as echoed by others here today, it would not reduce the amount of community input in those projects. And I can speak from my experience on projects here in San Francisco with 474 Natoma, as well as with the Rebuild Potrero project, in which we have done extensive community design meetings and community hearings on, what they want and what are the most important things to them. And that's something that we've done outside of this conditional use process. So it would not at all inhibit those efforts. And as one of San Francisco's largest providers of affordable housing, Bridge supports a variety of efforts to improve the housing pipeline, reduce administrative barriers, and bring more affordable housing projects online quickly. The voters spoke strongly this past election with an unprecedented support for more affordable housing production in the city. This legislation is a simple and important tool for Bridge and other nonprofit developers can utilize toward achieving this goal. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If there's any other members of the public that are here and they would like to speak, please come on up.
I am Leora Tanwatko, and I'm speaking in favor of Mr. Wiener's legislation today. First of all, I think it just makes sense to have a streamlined process for affordable housing when we're so desperately in need of it. I also think that there's this mindset that, number one, if you're in a neighborhood, you get to decide who your neighbors are, and I think that's absolutely wrong, and that's not something that we want in our city. And number two, that if you were here first, your voice matters more. And I think that in trying to create an inclusive and democratic city, those are two mindsets that we can really fight, and this legislation does that. As someone who works in creating community support for real estate projects, this legislation might actually take money out of my pocket in some of the projects that I work for, but I don't care because I care more about building housing for people who, need it and for people who don't make enough money to live here currently. So I'm in favor of this legislation, and thank you.
Thank you. All right, folks. Anyone else want to speak to item 3? Last chance. Okay, public comment is closed. The matter is back into this committee's hands. Before Supervisor Wiener speaks, I want to acknowledge Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just through the chair to Supervisor Wiener, what is the rationale for limiting it to 55 years?
That is how we define affordable housing. We incorporate state law, which is a 55 years. So that number of years is throughout our affordable housing program. So that's not unique to this. That just conforms with how affordable housing is defined throughout the code.
So that's that reference to
state
California
code.
Health and Safety Code,
Yes.
Section 50093.
Yes, it's no different than other aspects of the code. Thank you.
Okay, well, I just wanted to lend my voice to the conversation. I believe that this legislation absolutely helps to prioritize building affordable housing units, which we all agree that we are in desperate need to move forward. I, representing District 10, have the pleasure of working not only with Bridge Housing, Mercy Housing, but also John Stewart, as well as a whole host of private developers. And it is refreshing to see that everyone is on the same page, that we are in agreement. There's a couple things that I, again, want just to reiterate that the project would also, all projects that are 100% affordable will be subject to the discretionary review process. And this process will have and take into the public's concern. So there is not a stifling stifling the opportunity for the public to weigh in on these particular projects. I think that's incredibly important that we support 100% affordable housing units. I don't know, John, you said John Stewart had an interesting quote, "Don't choke the chicken," but I didn't get the last part, but okay, don't choke the chicken, something for the egg? He's gone. Okay, well, that was good. I'll have to play that back. But it's an interesting, colorful way to kind of highlight where we are and my beliefs in this. And I know that folks have concerns about the public process component of the legislation. But again, just want to reiterate that that the process that we're talking about would not bypass the Planning Commission process altogether. Projects are still going to be subject to a 311 notification as well as pre-application meeting and process. And again, like I said, a discretionary review. So I am in favor of this particular piece of legislation. Also, one of the speakers also spoke of I think it was referred to as a brick wall in the Planning Commission. I just wanted to note that there was a commissioner missing and that it was actually a 3-1,
33.
Excuse me, thank you, a 3-3 vote. So it didn't necessarily hit a brick wall because and died. I think that there was some conversation around that. So I think Supervisor Peskin is whispering sweet nothings into my ear. He's got other comments that he wants to share. So with that, I am in favor of the legislation. Supervisor Wiener, thank you. You have my support. Mr. Peskin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just want to share my perspective on this as somebody who once represented the northeast corner of the city where a number of affordable housing projects, one of which Mr. Stewart referenced, took place during my tenure on the board. And I actually really appreciated, Mr. Stevenson, I think is your name, your comments, which is, as we all know, the vast majority of 100% affordable housing projects, if not the entirety of 100% affordable housing projects, are built by nonprofit developers. And indeed, you're absolutely right, which is, unlike for-profit developers, if they want to continue developing, they have to develop those relationships, deal with community input in order to remain viable. Very different than sometimes more arrogant, privately financed big capital that wants to have its way. So my experiences have actually been very, very good. As a matter of fact, I think that the opportunity for community input and dialogue has made certain projects better. We, I think, just saw that relative to Parcel O at Market in Octavia. We saw that actually in the case of North Beach Place, and Mr. Stewart has left. But when he's speaking about that 4.5 years, because I had a ringside seat, it actually started when Ronnie Davis was the head of the Housing Authority. And if there were impediments, those impediments were not from adjoining neighbors. They were impediments that were imposed by the Housing Authority for their mistreatment and their failure to come up with a decent relocation plan for the hundreds of residents that were in that facility. And I think that's a learning lesson. Interestingly enough, it was the surrounding community, the community that lives around Mr. Egge and myself and many others, Denise McCarthy, who wanted to rebuild a denser project at that location. Indeed, that's what we did. In the case of Broadway and Battery, the former freeway off-ramp, that was a case where the neighborhood and the nonprofit developer, in that case, the Chinatown Community Development Center, worked superlatively well together, and I think they ended up with a better project for it. Same with Broadway Sansom. As staff indicated, unfortunately, we only do a handful of these on an annual basis, and I have no problem with, quote-unquote, streamlining the process for these. But I think that we have to be cognizant, and I guess this is really an admonition to the nonprofits, that having that relationship and having that dialogue often results in a better project. And I think that the nonprofits get that. The one exception, the one horror story, was Booker T. And I have to say for the record that I find it ironic that one of my colleagues who was actually active in opposing that project is now a signator to the ballot initiative that has been proposed for the June ballot. And I will leave it at that. I also want to be very clear with my colleagues and the public that the conditional use process plays a very important role in honing a project. And it is very different than discretionary review. Discretionary review is an after-the-fact type of appeal, very different than what goes into a conditional use process, which I readily admit is more time consuming, and I readily admit that time is money, and as project costs escalate, that 6 or 8 months, or in the case of Booker T and Pat Scott is not here, can be millions of dollars, and that was the one horror story. The rest of the stories are actually very, very good stories, stories like Parcel O. But I want to be very clear with my colleagues and the public, because not from the nonprofit side, not on the affordable housing side, there is an increasing push to streamline more and more. And I think we have to understand the values of having an interactive process between the city, the developers, and the community. So I want to stress that. I think that 100% affordable housing projects are different. I also want to note that while there are a handful of nonprofit affordable housing developers here, there are many, many that are not here who have not emailed, who have not weighed in, who have not written letters, and I'm cognizant of that fact too. But with that, I am fine with sending the legislation to the full board for our consideration next week.
Are you comfortable sending with a recommendation? Yes, with a positive recommendation. Okay. Mr. Wiener.
Thank you. And thank you, Supervisor Peskin, for those remarks. And I think it is, I know we've all talked about this, but because we keep hearing from some people who are skeptical of the legislation that this somehow reduces community participation, I really want to reiterate that it does not do so. There is still full, robust design review. There is still full neighborhood notification, and if people are opposed, they can seek discretionary review and have a planning commission hearing where the planning department can reject the entire project or modify the entire project or approve the entire project. The same planning commission that would hear a conditional use. But why would we force projects that have that community support where there really isn't opposition to go through that process? And we know that many, many projects in San Francisco do not require conditional use, and people still participate, including some small projects. Some of the residential projects in our neighborhoods are at times some of the most contentious. Those do not typically require conditional use. And neighbors still have to notify their neighbors They still have to go through intensive, sometimes very lengthy design review with the planning department. And we pretty frequently see discretionary review end up at the Planning Commission. And the public is not removed in any way from that process just because there's not conditional use. Conditional use is not, by any stretch, the only tool we have to ensure good public participation. But what it does do is it adds an additional layer that I know Planning Department in their report says 3 to 6 months. I think that's conservative. As a member of the Board of Supervisors, I know my colleagues are in the same boat. We follow a lot of different conditional uses from large to small. And I'll tell you, if you get a conditional use from beginning to the commission in 3-4 months, that's like the rocket docket. That is like a minor project. Any complexity to that conditional use, and I'm confident that an affordable housing project, which is going to be, say, larger than, say, a small formula retail, I think 3 to 6 months is very optimistic. I understand that that's the estimate in the report, and some projects that may happen. I think 9 to 12 months is much more realistic, and we've seen even longer than that. And so I also want to say that, like Supervisor Peskin, I support the conditional use process in general. I supported subjecting formula retail to conditional use. I supported expanding the formula retail CU process to banks. I was a strong supporter of Supervisor Marr's legislation. I have authored multiple pieces of legislation to create new conditional uses in my district. For example, Supervisor Campos and I co-authored legislation to require a conditional use on Valencia Street if you're going to convert retail to a new restaurant, because there was a proliferation of restaurants that was impacting daytime foot traffic. I authored legislation in the Castro Upper Market area and in Noe Valley to require a conditional use if you're going to put an office space on ground floor retail, because we want our retail corridors to be active retail and not make it easy to put office space on the ground floor. And in those situations, it's unclear that those kinds of changes are positive, and so conditional use makes all the sense in the world. Not here. I also want to know I did pass around packets of support letters from Mercy Housing, Larkin Street, Bridge Housing, Spur, and Booker T. Washington, and I want to thank those organizations for supporting. And so, colleagues, I first want to move the amendments to conform the file to the substitute legislation that I introduced a few weeks ago, and then I will make another motion after that.
All right, thank you. Supervisor Wiener has made a motion. Did you get the motion? Okay.
Motion to amend.
The motion to amend, can we do it unanimously?
It's to substitute. Really.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
All right. All right, motion to amend. Without objection, the motion passes. Okay. Thank you.
And then, Madam Chair, I move that we forward item 3 as amended to the full Board of Supervisors with positive recommendation.
All right. Supervisor Peskin?
Yeah, without objection. And I do want to say, just relative to the Planning Commission and this thing that comes up about 3-3 ties or 4-3 or 3-4 or 6-1 or 7-0, and with all respect to the Planning Commission and our charter, at the end of the day, and I tell this to planning commissioners and I say it with sincere respect, it's just a recommendation to the legislative branch. So, I mean, I take it seriously and I look at their comments, but I just, because we get a lot of these, and now that there's one commissioner missing, there seems to be a bunch of these 3-3 ties, which we're supposed to read as disapproval. I mean, when I was first on the board and the mayor appointed all 7 members of the Planning Commission and they served at his will and sometimes were fired when they did not meet his will, the board that I served on would look at their comments and oftentimes vote the other way. So just wanted to put that on the record.
All right, thank you. A motion has been made, and without objection, that motion passes.
Thank you, colleagues.
You're welcome. Thank you. Madam Clerk, could you please call the next item for us?
Yes, item number 4 is a resolution urging the board and director of the Treasure Island Development Authority to develop a series of recommendations on how the city can utilize the formation of a community revitalization and investment authority.
Okay, thank you. I'd just like the record to reflect that Supervisor Marr has joined us. So, colleagues, Supervisor Kim is the author of this legislation and is still working with the stakeholders. She's requested a continuance to our February 8th meeting. If there are any members of the public that are here that would like to speak speak on item number 4, please do so at this time. Okay. Seeing no public comment is closed at this time. Supervisor Mar, are you here on item 4? Item number 6. All right, thank you. So may I have a motion to continue this item to February 8th? May I have a motion? Thank you very much. Motion made by Supervisor Peskin and passes unanimously. Thank you. Madam Clerk, please call item number 5.
Item number 5 is an ordinance amending the planning code to modify the measurement methodology for rooftop appurtenances and create a process to authorize certain types of infill floor area in existing structures located in the downtown commercial zoning district.
All right. So, colleagues, it's my understanding that the mayor's office would like to work on some additional changes on this legislation with the planning department, and they have requested a 90-day continuance. Let's go ahead and take public comment on this item, on item number 5. Any public comment? Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed at this time. Thank you very much. Is there a motion to continue this item for 90 days? Thank you. Motion made by Supervisor Peskin.
Madam Chair, you said 90 days?
90, yes.
And that would be?
3 months.
So you want that to April 25th?
That would be perfect. Okay. Thank you. April 25th. And without objection, this motion passes. Okay. Please, Madam Clerk, call item number 6.
Item number 6 is a resolution urging the establishment of a local match commitment to the National Housing Trust Fund and urging Senators Boxer and Feinstein and Representative Pelosi to further support the fund with expanded sources of revenue.
All right. Thank you. Supervisor Mar is the author of this legislation. I'll turn the hearing over to him. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. Colleagues, today I'm supporting the efforts of a number of affordable housing and community-based groups to support the National Housing Trust Fund. I wanted to thank James Tracy from the Community Housing Partnership, but also the National Low Income Housing Coalition for advocating for this at the national level as well. This is a board resolution that would support matching all National Housing Trust Fund funding awarded to recipient projects in our communities in San Francisco, and to urge Senators Boxer and Feinstein and Representative Nancy Pelosi to further support the National Housing Trust Fund with expanded sources of revenue. I should mention that this is really about ensuring that there's state and federal funding for extremely low-income individuals in our communities, and to support rental housing with local match components as well. So clearly the housing crisis affecting all of our communities and the lack of affordable housing is crucial for our city to address. And in order to truly ensure that all of our residents are housed, we have to do much more with support from the state and federal government. Unfortunately, the federal government has severely cut back its funding for affordable housing. Our federal responses to homelessness, for example, need to include serious commitments and recommitments to funding affordable housing. In San Francisco, the area median income, or AMI, in 2015 for a single person, one of us, is $71,350, according to the Mayor's Office on Housing. And thanks to Sophie Hayward for being here and being supportive as well. However, many of our residents and families are considered by federal definition, quote, ELI, or extremely low income, or very low income. An ELI household, extremely low income, making 30% or less of the area median income, or AMI. An ELI household in San Francisco makes $23,783 or less. Those are people living on less than $24,000 a year in our city. A very low-income household makes 50% of the area median income or less. And this includes households making equal to less than $35,675 a year. Fair market rent, I think many of us know, for a two-bedroom apartment in our city is somewhere around $1,960 per month. That's $1,960 per month, while extremely low-income renter households can only afford to pay about $728 a month. A worker, and this is important on wages, so for low-wage workers earning minimum wage in our city, they would have to work 141 hours each week in order to afford a two-bedroom apartment in this housing crisis in San Francisco today. So this shortage also extends to quite a bit, not just in San Francisco, but statewide. There's about 981,000 homes that are affordable and available for extremely low-income renter households. But ELI, or extremely low-income renters, really need much more support. The shortage of homes that are affordable and available for extremely low-income renter households is the primary cause of homelessness in our communities and statewide. The solution is really stronger support at the federal and state level, with also local support for the National Housing Trust Fund. It's a dedicated fund intended to provide revenue to build, preserve, rehabilitate housing for people with the lowest incomes. And it's about rental housing, and it's a fund that started in 2008. The fund was enacted as part of the Housing and Economic Recovery Act of that year, and this trust fund is a permanent federal program with dedicated funding sources, not subject to our federal annual appropriations process. And the purposes, again, are to increase and preserve the supply of rental housing for extremely low-income households and very low-income households, including many of our homeless populations in San Francisco and in the state as well. And it will increase home ownership for ELI and VLI households. Just some other context in history: when Fannie and Freddie Mae were taken into conservatorship by the Federal Housing Finance Administration, or FHFA, in 2008, their obligation to fund this trust fund was suspended. But fortunately, the director, Mal Watt, of the FHFA announced he was lifting the suspension in 2014 at the end of the year. And he directed Fannie and Freddie to begin setting aside funds in 2015 that make them available for March of 2016. So it's timely here. And the interim rules for the funding were created in 2015. I wanted to say that we have Sophie Hayward, the Director of Policy and Legislative Affairs from our Mayor's Office on Housing, here with us. Paul Bowden, formerly from our Coalition on Homelessness, but now as Executive and Organizing Director on the state and regional level with the Western Regional Advocacy Project. Also James Tracy from the Community Housing Partnership, and also Avni Desai, their Director of Policy from CHP. And lastly, from Mercy Housing, the Regional Vice President of Operations, Jennifer Dolan. So with that, I wanted to ask if Ms. Hayward wanted to give a few remarks before we open this up for public comment.
Good afternoon, Supervisor Sophie Hayward from the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development. I just wanted to come and again speak in support of this item. As Supervisor Marr indicated, we are operating in a climate with diminishing federal resources, and any dollar that we can bring to the table to augment the production of affordable housing, we need, we will use, and we will deploy. In particular, it has been challenging to finance the ELI and the VLI rental stock. And as I said, we certainly appreciate any additional federal help that we can get, and we will advocate hard when the allocation from the state is made to the city to make sure that we get our share. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Chairman, can we open this up now for public comment?
Yes.
So we'll open this up for public comment. Mr. Bowden? And if anyone would like to speak, please come forward. Oh, I have a number of cards. So Paul Bowden, and I had mentioned others, James Tracy, Jennifer Dolan, and I'll call a couple other names, Kendra Douglas from CHP, Dwayne Sears from CHP, and Mark Anthony from CHP. And looks like Mr. Bowden needs the overhead as well.
Yeah, but they had me send in a PowerPoint presentation, and I'm not sure where it is. Here we go.
Great.
Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. I was homeless here. I actually came up at a hospitality house in 1983 when Dianne Feinstein was the mayor, and we had just started. October of 1982 is when we started our homeless program in San Francisco. Again, we were sleeping on the floor at St. Anthony's, on the gym court, the basketball court at Salvation Army, and me and my friends were sleeping, crashing in the chairs at Hospitality House on Leavenworth Street. Now here we are 30-something years later, and the problem seems to be getting worse than ever. and it certainly is getting worse than ever across the country. So about after 20-something years with Hospitality House and then starting the coalition, the Community Housing Partnership, a community effort to develop housing and show that poor and homeless people can build their housing for themselves, given the resources and the trainings to do so. We started a national organization. We're a regional network of groups fighting at the national level. As part of that effort, we created this report, Without Housing, which I have a couple of copies of if any of you would like to see the full report. It's a very simple report. This isn't rocket science. The advent of contemporary homelessness directly correlates to the cuts, the massive cuts in affordable housing funding that was started in 1982. We went back and we looked at, well, where did HUD come from? Why did HUD exist? What was the purpose of HUD? This is what we found. 1937, we had massive homelessness in the United States during the Depression. In 1937, because of local communities working with local governments, the federal government created what we now call HUD. HUD had the mandate to remedy the unsafe and unsanitary housing conditions and acute shortage of decent, safe, and sanitary dwellings for lower-income families in the United States. That's what HUD was created to do. In 1998, we get the Quality Housing and Work.
Madam Chairman, can Mr. Bowden continue?
Briefly, yes.
Oh, so, okay. I was told 10 minutes. I guess I'll do this really quick. Welfare reform in 98 wiped out and changed the preamble to what created HUD and said the federal government cannot be held responsible for providing housing. So housing went to the private market, and that started in the 70s. It was exacerbated in the 90s as part of welfare reform. Housing is a commodity. We know this because we know that the homeowner mortgage interest deduction program is $144 billion a year today. Affordable housing programs are $34 billion a year today. And when we say housing, we can't afford to subsidize housing for people, we're only talking about poor people. Obviously, at $144 billion a year for home ownership, we can afford to subsidize housing. If you owe me $50, I tell you to keep it. I just gave you $50. So a subsidy is the same as an allocation of funding. If you ask me for $50 and I give you $50, I just gave you $50. Either way, it's the same thing. Yet one is valued as sacrosanct and important to the economy and important to the country, and it doesn't even have a cap because it's funded through the IRS. There is no cap on how much money we're willing to allocate for home ownership. There is an incredible cap. And are they worthy? Do they have felony records? Can we afford it? Can they do street sweeping? It's charity when it's poor people, and that's $34 billion a year. That's racism and that's classism, and that's the way our housing policies are playing out. And local government needs to work with the state and federal representatives to fight it. To fight for all people that live here. If housing is good for homeowners, and having come from the street, and now I am a freaking homeowner, I can tell you I'll take home ownership anytime. I didn't qualify for housing assistance when I was poor and homeless. I qualify for it now because I happen to own the home that I live in. This slide right here tells you everything you need to know, and then I guess I'll cut it short since we don't have the full 10 minutes. But this slide here is from 77 to 83. Those are the cuts that came down. It really hit bottom in 79 when Carter cut across the board. 1980, when Reagan came in, he decimated affordable housing funding. We, like I said before, opened our homeless program in San Francisco in October of 1982. I have the original documents from when we started referring people from our program at Hospitality House into shelters around the city. This is a direct cause and effect. Those little handcuffs that you see going across, that's been the major response to homelessness in the United States. It's been to criminalize the presence of homeless people. We have not restored that funding, and we have not addressed the cause of homelessness. Cause and effect. When we had that funding, we didn't have all these people sleeping out in our streets. And right now, in 2006, we had 600,000 children in our public school system that were identified as being homeless. Last year, it was 1.3 million. And in your public school system, the schools actually talk to each and every student, not like those ridiculous point-in-time head counts that tell us there's only 700,000 homeless people in the whole country, and yet we know in our schools there's 1.3 million children that are homeless today. The response with the HEART Act and the passing of the latest McKinney-Vento reauthorization bill was to redefine family and youth homelessness so that we developed a category called poorly housed. A family doubled up, a family tripled up, a family living in an SRO hotel room, a family living in an SRO hotel room no longer qualifies for homeless assistance programs that are funded by HUD because they are no longer considered homeless, they are considered poorly housed. Just like we went from poor to extremely poor, to kind of sort of poor, to maybe poor but not poor enough. We keep redefining people's poverty, hoping that we can reduce the number of people that are living in poverty. We need to start addressing the systemic causes of it and the systemic reasons behind it. And we have a congressional leadership from this city that is pretty powerful in Washington, D.C., and can be a voice, can be a pulpit. And if we had the organizers and the developers and the poor and homeless people and the Board of Supervisors and our congressional and state representatives all standing together and saying we need to fund the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, not just pass it. We need to fund it. And I'll skip to this, it goes on. The race and class issues, 3.5 times their percentage of the general population are the people that are living in our streets, African American, just like in our jails, just like in our public housing programs. This is about race and class, folks, and we need to start dealing with it. And this whole thing of 5-year plans, 10-year plans, continuum of care plans, as some of you may know, I was on those planning bodies. And I went through those processes. And it is the most ridiculous thing. We don't need another plan. We need to look at what caused it, what happened right before we opened our shelter programs. We eliminated affordable housing funding. Then let's get busy and start addressing that. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bowden. Madam Chairman, I forgot to mention that we had a couple of presentations. I know generally it's department reps that make the presentations, but the Community Coalition has been working at this for many decades, as Mr. Bowden said. So I would urge us to be respectful of the time for James Tracy and Jennifer Dolan as well, who are part of our presentations before public comment is open. But thank you so much, Mr. Bowden.
Okay.
Sorry for running long. I was just doing what James told me.
No problem. So let's get Mr. James Tracy up here from Community Housing Partnership.
All right. Thank you very much, supervisors. As I think that San Francisco City family is on the same page that housing is the #1 solution to homelessness. The National Housing Trust Fund, it took in the early 2000s mass mobilizations of led by Religious Witness with homeless people, led by Homes Not Jails, led by the National Housing Trust Fund, the National Days of Housing Action of 2003-2004. However, it was Hurricane Katrina that finally helped build the political momentum to pass this thing through Congress. This resolution will do two things. One, it will make San Francisco more competitive for the scarce amount of trust fund money, which will be offered through the states this spring. So it's a good thing in and of itself for that reason. But it also urges San Francisco to get a lot more serious about the way that we, as a city that does know how, that has added so many thousands of housing for people, in order to get serious about its lobbying efforts, to get serious about leading other cities to really reverse these 40 years of displacement, these 40 years of homelessness. I think all of us here in this room are old enough to remember when you could walk down Market Street and there were very few homeless people. It wasn't because because they had been all swept away by police. It was because we had enough had enough support, so not very few people slipped all the way down to the streets. I hope that you support this resolution. We're very proud. One of the things that makes it worth it for me to come work at Community Housing Partnership is that we have leaders like Mark Anthony and Donnell and Dwayne who have experienced homelessness firsthand, are living in our buildings, but continue to speak out for the need for more housing for all human beings. So after Jennifer comes up from Mercy Housing, I'm looking forward to hearing from them. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Jennifer Dolan from Mercy Housing. I'm here actually to represent the Supportive Housing Providers Network. We're a fairly new collaboration of providers here in San Francisco, and we are here to advocate on behalf of supportive housing and the successful model that we believe we've been delivering to San Franciscans over the past 20 years. We believe that people in supportive housing do live more stable and productive lives and therefore cost significantly less money to the taxpayers of San Francisco if they can be housed in our buildings. As supportive housing providers, we value and encourage housing mobility. Every client and individual is slightly different, and having that ability to move in and out of the different types of housing that we can provide here, we find is essential. The core problem and challenge, however, is that we don't have a construction and a maintenance source and streams to deliver more affordable housing for the growing need. So the National Housing Trust Fund is one way to ensure that the state does continue to receive funds from the federal government and to build and rehabilitate more affordable housing and give home ownership opportunities to our extremely and very low income San Franciscans. So on behalf of the Supportive Housing Network, we urge the board to adopt this resolution as a way of highlighting the federal government's efforts to improve our housing here on a local level and to provide additional supportive housing. Thank you.
Thank you. And we had called Kendra Douglas, Dwayne Sears, Mark Anthony, and Donnell Fuller as well.
This is for public comment. Is Sophie Hayward speaking from the mayor's office?
She already gave a few comments.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark Anthony. I'm a proud resident of Community Housing Partnership, and I have been for the last 13 years. And I've also been able to give back to the community for the last 10 years. I'm an organizer, and I have worked with local and state issues that I'm really proud to say that we've done some good things happening for the city. Also, I like to say that formerly homeless and now housed, the legislation states that I can't move forward. You know, I'm an SRO, okay? I like to see the funding that's going to take us, the people that are got roots here in the city, that love the city, and are giving back, and stay in line with the mayor's saying he wants to clean up this homelessness off the streets, okay? And I think it's a win-win situation if you support that funding for us to better ourselves in our lives. Thank you very much. And also, you know, Utah, they did their act. They cleaned up their act in their streets. They got everybody off the streets and put them in housing in their own apartment. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Next speaker, please come on up.
Hi, my name is Dwayne Sears. I'm with Community Housing Partnership in CORE. I support this funding for the housing because of health reasons. It would stop the impact of all the stuff that happens on the streets by being homeless, and I support it.
Thank you, Mr. Sears. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Mr. Darnell.
Could you pull the mic a little closer to your mouth so we can hear you?
Good afternoon, Mr. Supervisors. My name is Darnell Fuller, and I'm here for the need of supporting housing for funds for many people, housing and confirming too many people on the streets and need help. We need more funds. We can build more housing for opportunities for and save lives. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members that would like to speak on this topic? Come on up.
Good afternoon. My name is Derek Brown. Running a little late, but I'm here just to say that I support the bill. I work with various organizations, Community Housing Partnership, and then again, I just want to say that I think it's very important that we get people off the streets who are homeless, and so they can have affordable housing in San Francisco. This is a great city, and we need to support one another. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Hi, I'm Anaxel Rama with Community Housing Partnership. I'm also a former homeless individual here in San Francisco who was able to go through Community Housing Partnership and get housing and then move on into another SRO. And so I'm very aware of the issues of people being able to move on from one area of housing to the next. And one of the things that I want to bring to your attention, I'm on the Shelter Monitoring Committee for the city, and I know with Community Housing Partnership we have a 2-year wait list. But a lot of the shelters only have at max like 3 months that you can stay there. So there's a huge disconnect, and I think having more funding for affordable housing, we can start closing that gap. Thank you so much, and I encourage you to support this resolution.
All right, thank you so much. If there's any members of the public that'd like to speak at this time on this item, please do so. If not, I'm going to close public comment. I think you've already spoken, sir. Okay, got it. Got it. No, I'm sorry. Okay, public comment is closed at this time. Supervisor Marr, is there anything else that you'd like to share with us?
I just wanted to thank Chair Cohen and the speakers. I think it's very clear how empowering this project is and what amazing improvements it'll make to San Francisco, but also statewide and nationwide. So thank you so much for the organizing, the advocacy, and the research done on this. And I urge strong support from my colleagues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So is there a motion to... Okay. Thank you, Supervisor Wiener. Supervisor Wiener has indicated support. So we'll move this motion with a positive recommendation to the full board. And without objection, this motion passes. Congratulations. Thank you. Madam Clerk, do you have any other business for us today?
No, that concludes our business for today.
All right, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Thank you.